now we'll make a pulled handle. Pulled handles are anytime when you have clay wet in your hands and you stretch it. And there's a couple different ways to do this. One is to pull the handle and then apply it to the vessel, and the other is to pull the handle right off the pot. And I use a way that's halfway in between most of the time. What I'm going to do is make a tapered shape on this big lump of clay so that this part will be the handle, and I could make 10 handles off of this lump of clay. The idea of having a big chunk of clay here is also so I can set it down without actually having the handle on the table. The best way to do this is actually hold it up in the air in front of you so you can see what you're doing. Lots of times students want to pull a handle doing something like this. The water's going to drip on the floor and it will drip, so just don't worry about it. The way this works is your hand and the clay needs to be wet, and you don't actually want to squeeze. You want to put your hand on the clay and just pull your hand right off. The follow through, or pulling it off the end of the handle, is important. If you put your hand on the clay and squeeze, what will happen is you'll make a thin spot, and then when you're pulling, clay will come off in your hand. This is a pretty big piece of clay for the size of the pot, so it makes sense to make this roughly the shape and size that you might need. I'm making a bigger handle here just so you can see how it works. And this is larger than I'll need for this pot. So there's two ways to keep the handle going straight. One way is to change the direction of the handle in my wrist. I'm just rotating this wrist to do that. And the other way is to put your thumb on one side and then the other. And many potters actually make a groove down the middle with their finger as well. But if you pull all on one side, obviously the handle will grow longer on that side and it'll be crooked, which could be okay. I'm going to just make this thin as a kind of practice before I start. So I can tell this is a little thick down here. I'll pinch it off, otherwise it'll rip off when I don't intend it to. This is good practice to see what you can get away with and to see how gentle or delicately you can pull the clay. And it's quite thin now and small, obviously the wrong proportions for this pot. So I'll pinch some off and make a handle from there. I'll pull a handle and then apply it to this vessel. The advantage of pulling a handle completely before you put it on the pot is that if you don't like what you did, you don't already have it in place. The disadvantage is it's harder to make the proportions correct. So I'm going to do my best to guess the proportions that I'd like, and I'll make it a little extra long, and we'll call that good. So I'm going to just hang this off the edge of the table, and then I can cut it and stick it onto the piece. There's several ways to cut this. One is to use a knife, but another is to just use the wire tool, and I usually use the wire tool. If I grab both ends so there's a loop here, I can pull it through, and I can actually control the angle in the curvature by how I pull the wire through the handle. And I'm going to make this handle come straight off the surface. So there's a curve. One hand is dry and one hand is wet, so this isn't slippery. I'll add some slip to both the vessel and the end of the handle, scratch them up, and then stick it right on. It's important to get the inside smooth because that's where your fingers are going to go. I'm going to attach the handle all the way around, press it against the pot, but try not to pinch it right before it hits. Beginner handles are almost always narrow before they land on the vessel. It's a little bit thick up here, but I think it's okay. And I can adjust the curve still. and then decide where it's going to end up. I generally don't slip and score the bottom. This is a little softer here than it is up here, so I can just press it on. It's a fairly traditional handle. The less you mess with it, the more likely the curve is going to stay smooth. So we'll call that good. We'll pull another handle and stick it on the pot. By tapering this lump of clay, it makes it easier to begin pulling it. Once you get the hang of this, it goes pretty easily. The first couple might take a little while. It's important that you have taper, so it's wider and narrower and thicker and thinner. That helps the handle to look like it's growing organically off the vessel. This is a much longer handle than I'd need for this piece, but that's how long it ends up in order to get the chunk that I want. I'm going to put a similar handle on to the last one. We'll start in a different place, but it'll do basically the same shape. Sometimes if you bump the handle a little and make it thicker where it attaches, it's easier to attach without making a thin spot. The handle almost always gets a little bit deformed as you attach it, so I'm going to just let the bottom edge rest on the vessel and attach. I'm not using any tools because I don't need to. Many people will pick up some kind of a tool to smooth or adjust the handle, and that's okay. I kind of want the edge of the handle to take off from that line there, and I want this end to take off from that wide spot. It is possible to readjust the handle a little bit after you've put it on the pot. I can very gently take off the fingerprints and smooth it out, but what you don't want to do is bend it back and forth. When you do this, the handle becomes quite weak as water gets into the very small cracks that are in the clay. This looks a little bit big, but remember, everything is going to shrink in the firing, so it's okay for the handle to be a little bit giant size. Make sure it's relatively straight and press to put it on. This style of thumbing the handle on is quite common in historic examples, and I think it's quite beautiful too, so I oftentimes will leave this very expressive attach point. It looks solid. Be careful where you set your pieces down. If you set it down in a bunch of clay scraps, it'll mess up the bottom. This big barrel-shaped handle or pot needs a pretty big barrel-shaped handle. Oftentimes it's good to slide the handle up as you attach it. This is actually too thick here, so I'm going to cut it back a little bit more. until I put it on, I can change my mind. And once you put it on, if you change your mind, that's okay too. I remember being told once that if you put the handle on wrong the first time, it'll look bad no matter what you do, and I don't really believe that. If you put a handle on and you don't like it, you should just take it off and start another one. Now it's too small, so I'm going to do another one. It doesn't take long to make another handle. It's worth it. These handles are all similar to one another, and that's on purpose, so you can see the same thing several different ways. This handle needs a little bit of extra clay at the top too, and it's okay to go ahead and add some. One strategy is just make a small coil, put it right in there. This will make the handle more solidly visually attached. And I kind of like the lines that it leaves behind as well. This line here and this line here. It's not hidden that it's an extra piece of clay. It's actually a really big round handle. I'm going to make it a little bit closer to the vessel. The farther away the handle is, the more awkward it is to use. I can change my mind still about where the handle goes. It could go up here or down here, but I pretty much just need to put it on and go on to the next one. I can also change the shape of the handle just by tapping the pot. I think that's okay.